You know, I get very, very disgusted when I get a lot of, fanboys and trolls that try to pretend like they know some knowledge about basketball. But when they step up to a person or a guy that knows the game and studies the game, you know what I mean? Like myself, Ticket TV, LB, and a lot of other brothers that know their stuff about basketball, boxing, baseball, football, whatever, then they really get sidetracked and start losing their place. Now, what I'm talking about was what happened on Friday night, okay? I was debating against some, Isaiah Thomas fanboy that tried to portray that Isaiah Thomas, won the championship in 1989 and also 1990 against the Celtics and the Lakers and the Bulls when they were at their allegedly prime, okay? And I went down there and basically eated this guy in a way where it was not even funny. I didn't even look up the stats about Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons or even the teams during the 80s. It was basically through my head. You know what I mean? But I'm using that story and I'm using, what happened, the debate Friday night to really illustrate about what's the title on this video. Okay. Now, the illustration about the Bad Boy Pistons was that they were a tough minded and dirty defensive team. There's no denying about that. And the ringleader was Isaiah Thomas, who basically assigned and approved and also supported that kind of dirty level play to do whatever it took to win championships. You know what I mean? Now, I don't deny how those guys were basically all dirty players, but I respected how they were basically a tough-minded defensive team that played basketball in a certain way where they did what they had to do to win championships. And the fact is, they were no doubt a dirty-minded team, but they were successful in doing it and won championships through it. But I wanted to basically expose the myth about the Bad Boy Pistons beating the Celtics, the Lakers, and the Bulls when they were at their peak during the 88-89 season, when they won their first championship. That was what the troll was trying to elaborate on. And I will post the link of the debate in the comment section, you know what I mean? So y'all can check it out yourself to see how I buried this dude. But I'm going to make sure to give this video illustration of how the Celtics and the Lakers and the Bulls were not at their peak, but more importantly, the Celtics and the Lakers were beginning on the downside. Now, let's begin, okay? The 88-89 season, okay, which is basically the first season with Jimmy Rogers as the head coach after Casey Jones basically resigned as coach after so many years, all right? Let's look at the age level of this team, okay? Ken McKay was 31 years old. He played 78 games and averaged 22 and a half points per game. Robert Parrish, 35 years old. He played 80 games and averaged 18.6 points per game. Now, Dennis Johnson was 34 years old and it was actually entering the final years of his career. Okay. He played 72 games and averaged 10 points per game. Danny Ainge, 29 years old, you know what I mean? Played 45 games and started 28 and averaged at least 15.9 points per game. Now, what happened to Larry Bird? What happened to Larry Bird was he was 32 years old, but he only played 6 games because he had surgery on his heel. All right. And he was supposed to come back during that year, but unfortunately, the injury took a little bit longer to heal than expected, and he was basically missed out the entire year. And plus, you also have to consider the injured back that he dealt with back in '86, because if you remember the HBO documentary about Bird and Magic, Bird basically injured his back, basically shoving gravel in his mother's driveway. All right. And in the course of those 6 games of the 88-89 season, he only averaged 19.3 points per game through 6 games. The only youngest player on the roster during that time was Reggie Lewis, entering his second year in the league and averaged 18.5 points per game. All right. This is where the draft pick of Len Bias was supposed to help, because he would have been the guy to basically play the heavier minutes and kept the Celtics in championship contention while both McHale, Parrish, and Bird were entering their older ages. Okay. And they only finished with at least 42 regular season victory and finished third in the Atlantic Division and were the eighth seed in the Eastern Conference against the Pistons that won 63 games during that year and traded Adrian Dantley to the Mavericks for Mark Aguirre. Okay. So clearly that notion of the Celtics during their peak in '89 is debunked. Now, number two, the Los Angeles Lakers, where they met in the NBA Finals. Okay, they won 57 regular season games. Okay, they were obviously first in the NBA in terms of offensive efficiency and seventh in the NBA in terms of defensive rating. Okay, Magic Johnson, who won the second MVP in '89, played 77 games and averaged 22 and a half points per game while dishing out 12.8 assists per game. Okay. James Worthy, 27 years old. Okay. Played in 81 regular season games and averaged 20 and a half points per game. You understand what I'm saying? And the three remaining core guys, Michael Thompson off the bench was only played 80 games, started eight, and was 34 years old and averaged 9.2 points per game. Michael Cooper, their top defensive specialist, played 80 games, all right, and it was only 32 years of age. You understand what I'm saying? In his final year, and only averaged about 7.3 points per game. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which was his final season in the NBA, okay, played 74 games. All right, missed seven of them due to injury, and he only averaged about 10.1 points per game. All right, Byron Scott, which I almost forgot, played 74 games and was only 27 years of age and averaged 19.6 points per game. He was their third leading scorer. All right, now they did, however, blitz through the first three rounds of the playoffs, sweeping both the Blazers, the Sonics, and the Suns to get back to the finals. But what happened during the off days while the Pistons and the Bulls were battling in the Eastern Conference Final? Okay, Pat Riley put them through intense workouts to try to keep his team finely tuned. And what happened? Byron Scott tore his hamstring before the start of the NBA Finals and was forced to miss the entire series. So you lost one of your main uh, shooting guards, a guy that was so critical in terms of their defensive game planning against the three-headed monster guard of both Isaiah, Dumars, and Johnson. All right. And then in game two of that series, midway through the third quarter, Magic Johnson pulled his hamstring too, pretty much finishing out his series. All right. And so by that time, the Lakers lost two of their starting backcourt players. You understand what I'm saying? And forced guys like David Rivers and Mr. Michael Thompson to play heavy minutes in those positions. All right. Despite monster performances by James Worthy, it was never enough because the three-guard lineup of Isaiah, Dumars, and Johnson were just too much for the Lakers to deal with as they got swept in 4 games. That one is debunked. Number three, the Chicago Bulls, a team that was not expected to make it to the Eastern Conference Final. All right, because we all got to remember something. The Chicago Bulls that time were basically playing downhill during out that whole season. Okay, let's see. The Bulls at that time. They only won 47 regular season games. All right, they were 12th in the NBA in terms of offensive rating and 11th in the NBA in terms of defensive rating. So they were basically the middle of the pack. All right, and during that time, the Bulls were not at their peak yet. Even though Jordan was still leading the NBA in scoring, averaging 32 and a half points per game, he had to play most of the season playing point guard, and his assist totals went up. All right, averaging 8 assists per game and grabbing at least 8 rebounds per game. But let's look at the core players that played in that team. Horace Grant was a rookie that year, averaged 12 points per game, but basically was ineffective in the conference final. Scottie Pippen, this was also his rookie year. Okay, basically you've got two young guys that was basically going to be playing. I should say, take that back. This was Pippen's second year in the NBA. My mistake. My mistake. Just had to make sure to check that real quick. All right. So let's put it in this context of perspective. Okay. Two of your main guys are both 23 years of age. All right. They were basically young pups at that time. All right. John Paxson was basically 28 years old, but was not a starter yet. All right. So pretty much put it like this. That team was supposed to lose in the first round of the playoffs against the Cleveland Cavaliers that were vastly superiorly better than them and had to face them at least 6 times during that year. And Cleveland won all 6 of those meetings, okay? It wasn't until the playoffs where everything changed. You understand what I'm saying? Because that Cleveland team was just vastly superior than the Bulls. when you had Brad Doherty as your center, and when you have Larry Nance playing the power forward position, and then a young Ron Harper. People forget Ron Harper was an explosive two guard that, without the knee injuries that came in later on in his career, was a guy that could match Jordan's athletic ability and speed. But it wasn't for that dumb decision by Lenny Wilkins to put Craig Elo guarding against Michael Jordan in that final possession when Michael hit the shot. The Cavs would have won the second round, would have made it at least to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they probably would have lost to Detroit. But that's no here or there. But what I'm telling you is the Bulls made a Cinderella run to the Eastern Conference Finals. They beat the Cavaliers in by the shot by Michael Jordan. Then they beat the Knicks in 6. Then they were up 2-1 against the Detroit Pistons when Michael Jordan hit the game-winning shot in Game 3. But then afterwards, the Pistons adjusted, played harder defense on Michael Jordan, basically the Jordan rules, and beat them in 6. And at that time, the Bulls were still an up-and-coming team that have now started to become championship contenders. So that one is also debunked. When you really look at the myth of when you look at the myth about the Bad Boys, those being those 3 teams in their peak, that is absolutely false, because they were one team they beat. Chicago was a team that was up and coming, and they were not at that championship level yet. All right. The Celtics were basically on the downside because their key players were getting old and were getting hurt. All right. And plus, the Lakers maybe could have made that series competitive, but they were a bit on the downside because Kareem was going to retire at the end of that season. All right. So in those contexts of all the things that I've given you all that theory of the Pistons beating those teams at their peak is just ridiculously false, because we saw what the Pistons did in 87 when they lost to the Celtics, and what happened when they lost to the Lakers in 88. Now, the Lakers in 88 was a robbery because I believe that Kareem was not fouled by Bill Laimbeer on that last possession when he was going up for his hook shot, and all Bill Laimbeer did was stand straight up. He didn't even push him. He didn't even touch him. But the reason why he got that call is because of his reputation. That was a reputation call more than anything else. And unfortunately, it bit him in the ass, and it costed them a championship, even though they were able to redeem it the next year. But what I'm telling you is that the whole notion that Isaiah beat those teams in their peak is absolutely false. Sometimes you got it. Sometimes you may get lucky and run into certain situations where you don't have to face those teams at their absolute best. But that notion right there is where I eated this troll in the worst way, and he had nothing to counter on because he tried to belittle me and trying to say like, "Oh, you didn't see it because you never even saw those games at their time." Don't matter, bro. I watched those games on ESPN Classic. I studied those games when I was a kid and had a good idea of how physically imposing the Pistons were, and I respect them for that. But unless if you watch these games yourself and did your homework about those teams and how things were back in those seasons, you're really missing out about what was going on during that time. Because I'm going to tell this every single time, stats don't always tell the full story. They're good tools to use to try to analyze of how good those teams were, but they don't always tell you the full story. And what I'm telling you this though right now, the Pistons during that time, sure, they won their championships, but they didn't beat those teams at their absolute peak. All right. And the one team that was basically slowly at their peak was the Chicago Bulls until 1991 when they finally were just better than the Pistons. All right. But I just had to come down here and basically slam the door on that myth. Y'all have a good night, guys.